we didn't realise the engines had started until we'd levelled out, I don't think. Your senses returned to some kind of normality, and you realised that you could be in with a chance of making it. And obviously spirits rose noticeably when we levelled out.
Now, the captain managed to start 3 engines, but I understand that one failed after that.
Yes, we levelled out, and by the feeling in my stomach, I gathered that we'd stopped losing height so quickly. But suddenly there was a sort of spraying sound from outside. That's the only way I can describe it. And we noticeably lost altitude again, quite dramatically. And evidently I'm given to believe that this is when the 3rd engine did pack up, and that left us with 2.
So you were cruising around about 11,500 feet.
On 2 engines.
And the mountains where you were going, or there are mountains in the way, aren't there?
Yes,
which
there
are higher.
Yes, the mountain range is 11,500 to 12,000 feet high, and the pilot, we only heard later, obviously we didn't know what was going on at the time, but later we heard the pilot was flying the aircraft by dodging the summits of these mountains. Very clever, especially when your windows are all blacked out. The windows were in fact sandblasted by the volcanic ash, so he was flying blind, just flying by radar and controls.
You obviously had to make an emergency landing at the nearest airport, which was Jakarta. What were you told about that?
We were told over the grapevine, the stewards and stewardesses were gradually given the information by the flight deck that we were going to make an emergency landing, or as they said, crash landing at first, in Jakarta, 20 minutes away. Spirits noticeably rose when we heard this information, because it was good to hear that we had a chance of getting down. But during that 20 minutes, the plane was thrown about in the sky, something rotten, and the tension on the people's faces was not a picture to see at all.
Were there any light-hearted moments in this drama?
Yes, there were. When the plane did right itself, an Australian couple behind me who had been having a very good time on the plane before the incident, quite a little party, in fact.
When you say a good time, what were they doing?
Well,
celebrating?
They were making the most of the British Airways complimentary drinks. And celebrating, yes, I think they'd had a party before they left, and when the incident occurred, they shut up immediately, and there was absolute silence. I hadn't seen them so quiet for the whole journey. Yet when we levelled out, the husband suddenly said, "Well, that's pommy drivers for you," which I think summed up the situation completely for me.
But overall, you would say that you're very lucky to come out of it as you did.
Quite right, Steve. Yes, I think I'm very lucky. I've never been so petrified in my life, and I don't think until I actually die that I'll come so close to death.
Well, apart from that incident, you had the emergency landing on only 2 engines, so that must have been fairly scary as well.
Yes, it was. Every now and again we'd glimpse lights from cities or small towns as we passed over them, and so we knew that we were getting very near the ground, and on our approach we were being thrown around quite a lot in the air. And then eventually we made a surprisingly good landing on 2 engines. I think the 2 engines that were working were on just one side, which made the plane very unbalanced. So we did bounce a little when we landed, but surprisingly good landing. The captain was a real hero.
Did everybody break out into applause at the end of that landing?
Oh, yes, spontaneous applause, cheering, laughing. The relief on people's faces was a picture to see, it really was. After the tension suddenly broke, yet up to 2 days afterwards, I noticed in the passengers, people would suddenly burst into tears spontaneously, which must have been a delayed shock. For me, as soon as the incident was over, that was fine.
What happened when you landed at Jakarta?
When we landed at Jakarta, we were greeted by happy-looking Indonesian officials who seemed rather surprised to see a great big jumbo jet suddenly dropping on their little airport. There were emergency vehicles all over the runway pumping foam down. Obviously, this is strict procedure. They didn't have to inflate the safety chutes to get us off the aircraft because the engines had already been extinguished, and I don't think there was much risk of fire after we'd landed. But the plane was cleared very quickly, and then we were taken by bus to the terminal where we awaited departure to a hotel.
Obviously, the aircraft was completely unserviceable. Was a replacement aircraft sent?
Yes, a replacement aircraft was sent 36 hours later. They did, in fact, send out replacement engines for the damaged aircraft in case it could be made airworthy. But in fitting one of the engines, they dropped it on the tarmac, which was £1 million down the drain straight away.
How did you feel flying in an aircraft after such a terrifying experience?
Well, let me tell you, we were all sitting in the departure lounge waiting to get onto our next aircraft, and people's faces just said, "We don't want to fly again." And British Airways obviously knew this, and so all the staff from the plane that was involved in the incident came into the departure lounge, followed by crates of beer and other spirits, and there was a regular party. And this was very good PR work by British Airways, because by the time we all got on the plane, we were all half drunk.
Except for the odd ones who mightn't touch it.
I think everybody touched it.
Fine. And then you went on to Australia?
Yes, I went on to Australia. It was another 11 hours to Perth. And then I landed in Melbourne a further 3 hours later.
And while in Australia, just briefly, what did you do?
I worked for a television station for a month, doing work experience for my degree, and had a very good time. And it wasn't marred that much by the incident, although it'll stay in my mind forever.
I know it will, and it probably may deter other people from flying, but would you agree that flying would be one of the safest forms of transport available?
I would. There was the chief steward on the plane that was involved in the incident has been flying for 20 years, and he said that the last time he'd seen the oxygen mask, let alone any kind of incident, was 7 years ago. So I would say it's a very safe way to fly. And I'd also say fly the flag, because they're very good drivers.
Fine. And just in closing, there was another incident 2 weeks later in the same or a similar cloud.
Yes, there was. A Singapore Airlines jet hit a similar cloud, lost 2 engines and had to make a forced landing in Jakarta. It wasn't quite as dramatic as the incident I was involved in, but it was a nasty event, I led to believe.
Well, thank you very much, Bill, for talking to us, and we wish you luck in your media career and hope you don't have any more incidents such as you did have.
Thank you.
This is your captain speaking. We have a small problem. All our engines have stopped. We're doing our damnedest to get them working again. I trust you're not in too much distress.
A report from Flight International magazine, the 4th of September 1982. Captain Eric Moody, who nursed a British Airways Boeing 747 to safety after it lost all engine power in a cloud of volcanic ash, has received a certificate of commendation from the airline. Moody's cabin service officer, Graham Skinner, also received the award. He prepared the aircraft's passengers for an emergency landing as the aircraft glided powerless towards the sea. The interview with Bill Morris, broadcast on Manchester, England's Piccadilly Radio, was reviewed by Flight International magazine. Captain Eric Moody, who so calmly handled this major emergency, requested a copy of this interview along with world aviation medical experts.